Okay, let's talk on GraphQL. So the situation where uh, we are developing lots of API, lots of microservices, and our front-end applications have to call or invoke many number of APIs. So it's not possible from the client or from the front-end applications. We have given options. They can do query on the API because we are developing multiple huge volumes of API. Notice the enterprise applications like lots of modules, lots of microservices, and they have lots of API exposed, and all the APIs need to consume or invoke from our client or user application. So, is there any way client can do the query uh, on the API, not on the database query? So, look like a database. Whenever you have a database, you can lots of information is stored on your database. Okay, this is the database, and lots of information is stored in database. Okay, so the efficient way to retrieving data from the database, you can do query. Hey, select name, ID, and salary from the employee table. Select name and address of department. Okay, so in this way, from the lots of data, lots of row available, but you from the SQL query, you want to take or retrieve a specific information, specific data which you want. Similarly, in the case of API, whenever your multiple set of API, one microservice have a exposed set of API, another microservice exposed set of API, another microservice set of exposed API. Yeah, whatever the data layer you have, whatever the data layer have, maybe API, yeah, direct database or something. Is it not way our client, our front-end applications, our UI can do query on the API? So GraphQL is the one concept where given option from the front-end application, from the customer, from the UI, they can query on the API. Hey API, I need the user detail with the department ID this and address is this. Can you share the only name, address, and details? Or can you share just the dependent object? That means GraphQL given an option to the front end application, to the client. They can query on the API. So this is the GraphQL. You can say depend upon the situation. Sometime you can say no, I don't want give burden on the client just simply invoke and call. So depend upon the situation and scenario, where sometime our UI, our front end application required lots of data from the different tables, different value, and different column. So in those scenario, our backend applications are going to speak dozens of API, and each API going to call by our front-end application. So there is a chance is where we are going to consume lots of network bandwidth. While making the remote communications, it will take a times. Is it not possible we can avoid multiples invocations? Why not? Whatever the particular, let's say particular page I want to display, here I need a name, age, and department. So here, instead of calling the three microservice to get name, age, and department, why cannot say, hey, I need the name, age, and department from this is table, can you give me and response the only? So GraphQL also help us to reduce the remote call and reduce the burdens or the bandwidth consumption. So lots of benefits, and we're going to talk in detail. So what is GraphQL? So in short, GraphQL is a query tool for the front-end application from the UI application that can query on the basis of particular condition or particular API. Okay. So from the definition perspective, what the meanings of that? So let's talk. So as you know, GraphQL is a query language for API. Application programming interface API can be any kind of API. Simple method, simple REST API, simple gRPC API, simple RPC API, or any kind of application programming. This is not talk about the only REST API. It's API. To make the API in multiple way, this is like GraphQL is one of the API. So GraphQL help us to make a query from for the API. That's allow more flexible and efficient data retrieval. That means this API tell really on the front end application what kind of data user want to display. Only those specific data are come from the server, not multi just in only one call and get the data instead of calling multiple microservice again the required data. This is the two approach. One approach, our front end application going to call the three microservices, four microservices, get the data, parse the data, and extract the data what they want. Another way, just tell, hey, I need this data from this table, this data from this table, this is the related table, and our API respond there. Okay, so this kind of a GraphQL are initially developed by the Facebook in 2015, you can say, and that was you can say, and GraphQL provides a one way to describe data available in API and allow client to specify exactly what data they need, reducing the amount of data transfer and improving the performance. So overall, GraphQL help us, our client, our front-end application tell what exactly data I want, only those amount of data are transferred from the server to the client, and that will improve the application performance unnecessary multiple API calls. These are some basic concept in the GraphQL. One is the GraphQL defined like schema. The GraphQL schema is the define the types of data available in the API, including the relationship between the data. So here we have to define, hey, GraphQL can query on this schema look like a, in the case of a database like a table or a schema same. The same GraphQL also specify all the schema which client can do the query. So here they are defined. These are the available, you can say data structure. Let's say employee, department, address, payment detail. These are the kind of a schema. Or you can say in the basic terms, the object or the entity which they want. So here in GraphQL, those in scenario say we have to define our schema. So what number of object or JSON object or data structures can entertained by our GraphQL API, and also make a relationship. Hey, maybe employee related to department, department related to the finance. These are the relationships. Also maintain relationship. Similarly, GraphQL have a type like in the SQL or any programming language, we have data types. Similarly, GraphQL is the types are building the block that's of a schema and representing the single value or a collections value. The types can be types of custom, maybe schema types or float types and digit types. They have defined the proper types. And similarly, one is the fields. Field is the individual piece of the data that's a type can be. Type can be custom types where we can define. So these are the basics. One is the schema, and a schema is the kind of data structure which data are transferred over the internet or as a response or request. And similarly, types which types of data, and type may be single types value or collections of value, and each custom value may be what the number of field name, ID, address, what the response value they want. And after that, once you define the schema, once you define the types, once you define all the fields, then give the option to the query. Now our GraphQL allow you can do the query. So queries are used to retrieval data from the API, specify the types and field. You have to mention, hey, this is the types and this field I want. So in this way, our GraphQL can retrieval data on the form of the type and field and schema. And queries means getting the data, retrieving data from the our backend. Even GraphQL also option you can update, you can insert, you can change some value. So mutations are also allowed in the GraphQL API. Mutate so that is to modify the data in the API, such as a creating, updating, deleting, whatever the records you have. So you can say whatever the schema defined, those schema can mutate, means ki create, update, delete operations also GraphQL. So here is GraphQL is not just query the data, even you can do some mutation as well as. And there is a concept of resolvers are the function that run on the server, fetch data for the specific field. Inside the server side, there is concept of resolver, which are get the query, GraphQL query, and figure out, hey, these are the kind of fields, these are the kind of data we want. Those data only can respond. In generally, that's our REST API. Generally, we are respond the same data for every request. So here, no, you can tell me, hey, for this request, I need a two value. For this request, I need a three value. For this request, I these set of fields we required. So we can exactly mention the query, which schema, what types, and what the fields we want as a this query. And from the architecture perspective, very simple as same like a client server architecture. There would be one client. Client send the query or mutation request to the server. This is the one client application. Our UI application or front end application sending a queries or mutation request to the server server. And what the server receive the query or mutation request and execute the resolver fetch to the. And here in server have a concept of resolvers it resolve the query, understand the query meaning and what kind of data they are requested. They are retrieved from the database and prepare the response, what kind of response they want, and then find the response. The resolver are called to fetch the data from the each field in the query or mutation. So whatever the request want this field or data type right required, those are taken care by your resolver models. And finally, one is the your storage, from where actually data are going to store. So there is a data storage. The data is stored in the database or either storage system or file system or third vendor or some application. So high level architectures of the GraphQL, we have a client, we have a server, we have a resolver, and we have finally a data store. And the okay, so client communicate to the server, server communicate to the resolver communicate to the data storage, and finally get data and decide the which field, which response you want to finally give the response back to the. So from this is completely considered as a server side. A client is only our front end applications. And here data storage can be your local data storage, remote data storage, can be third party microservice or anything. So let's talk about the use cases. Very simple. Whenever we are building any web applications or mobile application, GraphQL is well suited for the both kind of applications and require the flexible, efficient data retrieval. Finally, whatever the applications you are building for mobile or the web, finally we have to show some data. That data come dynamically from the our server side. So getting data from the server side, this GraphQL help us. And generally, real-time data, you can say GraphQL is useful for the application that require real-time data, which is the maybe live update, notification, something where GraphQL help us. And even some complex data relationship, GraphQL is well suited for the API with the complex relationship that allow the client specify exact what data they need. So sometime your database have a lots of dependency, relationship, constraint, and in the scenario developing multiple APIs number of APIs going to so increase. So here we can button, hey, we can say, hey, this is my schema, this is my type, this is my fields, and tell them our UI developer, front end developer want, hey, from this table this data I want, from this table this data I want, this is the relationship. Just let them, our front end application, query them and get the data. So backend application are so simplified, and our front end as per the customer need a requirement, different pages, different responses, different attribute, different types they want, they can make. So these are the scenario where these GraphQL generally suit. And if we are planning to implement the GraphQL API in our system, these are the benefits by default, inherited benefit we can get. So overall, our application performance going to improve. Why? Because we are going to reduce the number of remote call from the front end application to the back end application, front end application to the back end application. Generally, in GraphQL API, we are exposing only one endpoints. They are very easy for the any kind of UI application to invoke one API and share the custom query. Query can be mutation or the query, and our backend API taken care. So here we are reducing the number of remote call. And due to that, you can say overall GraphQL reduce the amount of data transfer and improve the performance and reduce the latency. Okay, so here in the case of normal REST API, other API, we are responding the more data that might be only data are not required to display on the front end application. So lots of unnecessary columns are data we returning, and our UI just pass them, and whatever the relevant informations they retrieve and they can display on the UI. But here say unnecessary, you are transferring data packet on the internet that's maybe not required to the UI or front end application. So why not customer tell only I name, address and field, not other created time, date, time, updated time, every field on the particular table or particular schema. So here, due to that, you can say overall, we GraphQL help us to reduce the number of remote call, and also whatever the response you are returning, the only those data you are returning that's really required on the front end application, and unnecessary data you are not traveling on the networks that will take consumption of bandwidth. And even that's a good option, flexibility. GraphQL allow client to be specify exactly what data they need and reduce the need of the multiple API call. So they are GraphQL help us. Tell me you want to data name, address, something of the particular tables or schema. So in one API call, you get the all the data whatever you want. So unnecessary multiple remote calls are avoided by the GraphQL. And maybe this is the GraphQL is very strong typing. The GraphQL provides the strong typing which help us to catch error at runtime. So due to the typing, strong typing, lots of error at the runtimes can be avoided at the compile time itself. Whenever you're building API, you can take in care. So lots of benefit you can get from this GraphQL API. And lots of technology available here that help us to understand the GraphQL. Apollo server also a popular GraphQL server implementation for the Node.js application. And similarly, GraphQL for Java, Java implementation for a GraphQL specific scenario. It's a relay JavaScript framework for building the GraphQL client, and a GraphQL editor as well as a tool for designing and testing GraphQL schema as well as. So lots of technology available, and that's help us to design the GraphQL API. And if you talk about the real application that's are used as we initially talked, the GraphQL was designed and developed by the Facebook. So notice Facebook itself using the GraphQL because they are developed, they are solve our problem because on the Facebook page, notice on a Facebook page, we are whenever I'm a user, I am a login my Facebook. So for my user profile, notice generally only one profile data and one profile have a lots of data: name, age, photo, video, time zone, update, every lots of data we have. So instead of loading all the data for the particular customer on the UI, that's not a good choice. So here what the Facebook say, I am going to show the relevant information. When you log in, at the login times you want to what the data display only. When you click something, then what. So what they are using the graph keyword to so it's a news feed and lots of features Facebook are implemented from the Facebook UI application to interacting the backend application. They are using the GraphQL API itself. Similarly, you can talk about the GitHub. GitHub also is the GraphQL to provide the flexible, efficient API for the user. Okay. Similarly, lots of application, maybe Shopify, maybe Pinterest, also use the implemented GraphQL API to improve the application performance from the front-end application. So many times developer so confused. Hey, this is the GraphQL API. This is the REST API. What REST API are developed come before the GraphQL. So whatever the REST API can work for you. But GraphQL are developed after the REST API. So whatever the REST API have is some kind of a drawback, some kind of a overburdens, some kind of not more customizations option available in the REST API, because REST API have some set of restrictions. You can say REST API is a architectural style, and what is the one architectural patterns available. We have a 6 and 7 rules defined. So if we are building the RESTful API, that means we have to follow some certain rules. Last in the rest tutorial we talk. Due to that, the developer have a some level of restrictions we cannot do. Because REST API say we have to follow properly HTTP method. Get for only get API, post, delete, put, or different API you have to build. But GraphQL sometime not the follow this rule. So they have an option in one API. You can say query, one API you can say update or delete something. To depend upon the benefits, we are reducing our network call. So there are some kind of benefits in the particular domains, particular applications where the GraphQL help us. So let's basic understanding. So if you talk about the REST API, so in the REST API, generally whatever the client we have, a mobile application, web application, desktop application, they always request, hey, I want the particular request, call them and particular microservice responsive. Again, I want to particular order, call them and get them. So notice for the same users, here we are calling a two API. First, the name, the user detail, and the second, I want to give the your product detail. Might be scenario here. I just want to say, hey, name and the particular product and the quantity. Only these three fields required. But I want to call one API for getting the user detail that will return the three fields, and second API called the product detail that will require six field. In the sixth field, we only want to interested to show that three data. So on the UI, we pass the response and display only the particular, hey, this is the username, this is the quantity, and this is the product. Only three information are going to display. But we have to call here two API and the returning more data that's maybe not required. So unnecessary data are travels over the internet. So this is the scenario where many applications it is fit. There is no problem, but sometime very quick response, a real time application. We have to think where we can the save my times. So unnecessary data fetching from the database, that will take processing and building the response. Bigger chunk of data transfer over the networks, and again client side we are parsing them and fetching only those value that's we required. So GraphQL think what the scenario, what the places where we can save our time. So in the real time response, quick response, we have to, if possible, something we can avoidable. So here unnecessary extra informations our REST API return to the client, and the client have a burden. We have to parse them and fetch only the data which we want to display to the users, right? So in those scenarios, can be taken care by the GraphQL. So what GraphQL suggests, GraphQL say, hey, don't worry, you just tell one request and request say, hey, this is my user and I run name and the particular product and the quantity just amount. So just query them, hey, this is my query. I want to particular user ID is this, and from this user I want to the name and gender, and this user have a relationship with the order. So I need the order of the particular product and quantity and price. So whatever information you want to take, just take one query and you order them, and they just respond only what data you want to really show on the your mobile application. So then you only reduce the network call and the only those information that really required you want to take. So here actually you're the list of microservices that can maybe user service, order service that can serve information. But here our GraphQL server help us first know GraphQL defines our schema. Hey, this is the user schema, order schema, multiple income schema, what are the fields they want. Our GraphQL engine know the complete relationship, the data they want. And internally, they can call to the user service, they can get the data and particular order service, they can get data and prepare the response. Everything's inside, this is the server side, and here this is the client side. So clients is going to reduce the number of remote API call and unnecessary getting the extra information. Those two things are GraphQL help us to avoid. If we are not sending extra information to the customer, and if customer is not need, yeah, frontend application not need to call more and more API, that will reduce the remote call. So due to this facility, you can say we are GraphQL help us to improve overall our system performance and the real time responses we can returns. So let's talk some details, but these are the overall benefits are the high level architecture where both are the fit. So if we talk about the advantages in the both you can say REST API as well as GraphQL API, both have an advantage, both have a disadvantage. While selecting the REST API, you cannot say REST API is the bad or GraphQL API is the very good. So both have some advantage, both have some disadvantage. While your use case, while your application, you have to choose, hey, this where fit the GraphQL, this where fit the REST API. So many applications might be, you can expose both REST API as well as GraphQL API. Some module where he quickly responds, you want to fast response, so where GraphQL sometime you are just make a communication between the services, that's okay, you can use the REST API as well as RGRPC API. So in while the nowadays whenever you're building application, this is not very restricted, hey, you can choose only one API. Might be in one applications multiple modules, multiple component. One component we can build with the REST API, one component GraphQL, one component with grpc API. So please not bound restrict yourself, hey, who is the best for my application. Let's explore your business use case, and for your business use case, which technology, which communication API is fit for you, let's use them. So how to decide, you know, what are the advantage, what are the disadvantage, so that we can select the optimal outcome. About the rest, hey, rest have a maturity, because rest is come more early than the GraphQL. I think GraphQL is not more after 2015, right? Rest is come near about 2000, near about. Okay, so this is so mature, so old. So REST has been around a long time and widely adopted. REST is heavily used nowadays in the microservice environment, my non-microservice environment, but REST API is heavily used. And simply, it is a simple because the development of the REST API is very simple and well understood by architecture. Nowadays, lots of library, lots of framework, lots of language allow you can build from the customer perspective, even from the backend engineer perspective. We can just Spring Boot or Quarkus or Micron allow to build the REST API so simplest way. And best options, REST API response can be cached, because let's you call one API always get the same data again time, the same data again time, same data. So this response cache can be cacheable, so you are make your application more performance. And REST API is also maintain the stateless protocol. Due to that, it's become easy to scale your application. So these are the some additional benefits about the REST: maturity, simplicity, cacheable, and stateless. That's take the advantage of the REST. Let's talk about the GraphQL. GraphQL is more flexible. That means GraphQL allow client to specify exactly what data they want to reduce instead of overfetching and underfetching. So instead of you decide, hey, some API return the minimum information, some API return the huge data. So here say GraphQL say we are going to take care. What really you want, only those data are taken care about by the server. So in the case of REST API, many find, but some API returns some data that's not me fulfill other information. Maybe you have called another API to take more data, another API to you have to going to meet the customer requirement with the help of multiple call and many UI application you can think as a developer. For one building screen, you have to call 3 or 4 or 5 REST API. Some API return a minimum information, some API return the huge information that may be not required. So this is going to provide the GraphQL more flexible data travel over the internet, right? And similarly, they are more like a declarative. So in the case of REST API, they are predefined the structure, what the request would be, what the response would be. You know the API, this is the API, this is the request, this is the response. Always a response return. The here instead of this so declarative, graph you will say this is a declarative language and making it easier to describe its data and relationship. And you can check, I need this and this. This field, two field, I want three field, I want four field. Due to the strong typing, they avoid the unnecessary errors at the runtime. A GraphQL also designs to handle more complex and larger data set. Whether your database have lots of relationship and lots of fields, so you are going to take the advantage of this flexibility of the GraphQL API. Similarly, like this is the positive points of this API. Similarly, we have some negative points, some disadvantage as well as the this REST API in the GraphQL. So let's talk about the this is the major disadvantage about the overfetching data. REST is often required to fetch more data than needed. That is the slower the performance because we are defining the very generic kind of API. If this API can serve, so response can be contained more and more data that's maybe overfetched in some context and some scenario and some UI. Sometimes our REST API is the underfetching. REST may be required to return the multiple requests to fetch all the needed data. So this is the overfetching and underfetching. Sometimes our API return user name a plus ID of the order ID. Again, you have to call the order ID. And order ID response again contain the payment details, the payment details. So somehow you have to invoke multiple remote API call that serve the required data for the customer. These are the very tight coupling. This REST API can be tightly coupled with underlying data storage. It's hard to change. And similarly, limited flexibility. REST API have a fixed endpoint and method structure, and it's hard to change the requirement at runtime. So generally, a REST API to define that's fixed is the request parameter, that is fixed is the a response parameter. Generally, we are not changing this contract because this API can be consumed by the multiple customer. So, very hard to change the existing API if some customer want to modification. So due to that, there are alternative available in REST API. Hey, let's go to the versioning of API. For one customer, the same response. Another customer have say, hey, you don't use this API. You can use the different version of API because we are very hard to change because if something some interface change and lots of customers lots of our UI applications are consuming applications, this is very hard to maintain those data changes. Due to that, in the REST API we have a concept of version, different versions of API we are going to expose. And notice whenever you are exposing multiple versions of API, again the burden in the future we have to again go to the proper support the maintenance. So these are some kind of a points we should aware the REST have a problem. REST have a overfetching, underfetching, tight couplings, and very limited flexibility about the modification something requirement. In the case of GraphQL, also have some kind of a challenge. No, I'm not saying GraphQL have only advantage. No, they have also some kind of problem. This is the very complexity. The API you design that becomes so complex. The GraphQL required the good understanding of the query language schema. Okay, because the complexity we have a complete relationship of the schema, and if a senior in fresher junior engineer, first we have to understand the relationship between all the schema and the designs, and after that they are able to designs the able to reply, able to implement the query model, because this is the query, and query is come from the front end application UI can give the different query combination of query. And if our backend teams are not fully understand the relationship between all the schema, this is very hard to serve and implement the GraphQL. Okay, there is something problem with the learning, because this is the kind of a new technology, and all the developer maybe if not more familiar, not more implementation of GraphQL language, they are feel uncomfortable, right? So we have to lead some extra learning to understand the GraphQL architectures and learnings. And the major challenges in the GraphQL are also caching, because we have exposed only one API, one API in the query, you cannot cache the response. Why? Because the first query you set the different parameter, second query you set different field, less field, more field. So this is a problem in the you're not able to cache the result of the particular query, because GraphQL make caching more challenging due to the dynamic nature of query. Because here it's not a very fixed, it's not a very request and response always a fixed. Each times the response can be changed, because what the our customers send the request, depend upon the request, response can be varied, so you cannot cache them. And again, problem with error handling. GraphQL's error handling can be more complex than the rest. So these are the some kind of challenges, and both as a engineer we must aware. If you talk about the common characteristics about the both, like data retrieval, in the REST API, we always retrieve the fixed data set. If one API developed, they return the name, age, and ID of the department. They always return here. But here in GraphQL API, customer can define, front-end application can define, hey, what the data set they want. So they can more dynamic response other rather than the very fixed kind of data structures. Again, problem with the overfetching, always maybe overfetching. Here underfetching also problem with the comma. Similarly, but here we can reduce this overfetching and underfetching situation due to the dynamic nature of a GraphQL API. Here flexibility is, you can say, limited, but here very flexible, because these are the dynamic kind of query. So this is very more flexible than, and typing in the case of a very REST API, there is no kind of a data structure typing, you can say, but here very strong typing. GraphQL is very strong type support, because once you're going to define your schema, is to define a type as well as, and types and the field also good corresponding types. Due to the strong, lots of runtime error we can avoid at the compile time in the GraphQL itself. If we talk about the scalability, this is the good, and but GraphQL is more and more scalable. Okay, if you talk the complexity, yes, REST API is very simple, but GraphQL complexity is very high. Complex nature, because they need some kind of extra intelligence how to build this dynamic fetching data set, right? Similarly, caching, very simple to cache the response of REST API, very challenging to caching the response of GraphQL. So we have to be extra conscious. And error handling, REST API is very simple mechanism to handle the every errors. but this is the GraphQL kind of required more intelligence to taking care by the error scenario in the GraphQL, because there is one API which kind of error code, which kind of response code, how to handle, what the response would be. So we have to put extra intelligence to handle the error in the GraphQLs. So let's understand. You at least know this REST and GraphQL API, but we have to choose as an engineering team our responsibility. Lots of technology in the market available. We have to build our capability as engineer. How we can decide, how we can choose which techniques are API, are database, are algorithm. Because many places nowadays while the system designing, you have to face these challenges while selecting load balancer, while selecting API gateway, the technology, the API, the database, algorithm. Always we have to choose, we have to select. So at least as an engineer, we have to build our capability to choose the particular technology. How to choose? We must aware the pros and cons of the both technology, and you can think your customer requirements and then map. And according to the permutation combination, you have to decide, hey, this is the fit for my customer requirement. So as we discussed, REST is very simple API, and REST is a good choice when you are building the simple API and a small number of endpoints. So whenever your endpoint is the limited, and that's is a very simple. And if you have any legacy application, REST API is a good choice to work with the legacy system that are already use REST, because the REST is a very older than the GraphQL. And if your build application is small scalable, so REST is a good choice for building a small scale with a limited kind of requirement. It's similarly in the case of GraphQL. uh, you want to build some kind of a complex API, so GraphQL is a good choice to build a complex API with many endpoints and relationships. There are multiple endpoints, you want to make a relationship all and everything on the server side. Those scenario the bigger kind of very tight or related relational database that's are very complex in the joining or query something, where the complex API help us to choose your GraphQL. If in a very large scale application, GraphQL is a good choice for the large scale application with a high data requirement, highly related data actually. And best example, nowadays all the real time data, you want to quick response data. So you can say GraphQL is a good choice of the such real time updating feed notifications, quick responses. So all are these are the techniques, but this is my simple suggestion. We as a system engineer, our responsibility, we have to choose the right tools, right technology for my system. What your system means key for the customer. So we always focus on the customer requirement, use case, and scenario. And each use case, each scenario, each module might we have to require to choose different technology, different database, different algorithm, different load balancing, different API gateway, different kind of API implementation. So we have to build as a system design engineer capability to choose right technology for my right module, right use case, right function. So this is no any hard rule. Hey, this is the GraphQL fit for every requirement. No, we have to look the requirement of the customer, use case, understand the use scenario, how what the business capability, what the business capability, a business issue you are going to address it. So according to that, you have to select the right technology, right tool. This is only come you first know the technology, the tool, and what are the advantage, what are the disadvantage, what are the use case, what are the benefit, so that you can comparing to the multiple technology, and now considering your use case, for you use case which is the best fit, you can select. So for choosing the right technology, you have to do, sir, some homework. That means first we have to list out all the characteristics, advantage, disadvantage, use case scenario of the different technology, and you can think for my use case, for my modules, what are the best fit, and then you can select and choose. Might be while designing only one system, you have to go in the places, we have to choose multiple places, we have to go to select which is the best for my. So not go with the complete system, go with the use case wise, go with the business capability wise. For each business, each use case maybe different requirement, different scenario, different API, different gateway required. So go with a minor level of selection of technology, selection of database, selections of algorithms, selection of API. So make a habit to first know the technology, know the pros and cons, understand the customer use case, and then map your use case to the particular technology and select the best. So as a GraphQL, you must aware, hey, these are technology available, the particular use case scenario, if this fit, we can select the GraphQL. Okay, this is for the today. And I hope this information is helpful for you. Thank you.